Welcome back to the What's More podcast. I'm your host, Quinton Harris, and welcome back to the highly anticipated episode 225, where we're going to do our crystal ball forecast and our 2025 economic update. You know, sometimes this is often duplicated, but never replicated, and I'm pretty excited to be here to bring this to you guys. This was one of our highest viewed episodes last year. According to our Spotify channel and YouTube channel, this reached some of the highest views. We hope to beat that this year. So if you like what you're hearing on this, please share this episode. This is something that we get a lot of feedback on. Matter of fact, I travel all around the city doing this presentation. I'm even leaving the studio today to go straight down to St. Augustine to do this in front of a group of real estate agents. This is something that we definitely get a lot of feedback because it's something that you just can't go find on the internet. You can't go scour, Google search any of this stuff. This is about compiling of a full 3 weeks worth of effort put into this and a lot of sources and a lot of help involved in this. You know, just to kind of talk a little bit about our agenda, what we're going to go through before we get started this episode. We're going to recap 2024. We're going to talk about the supply and demand in the market and what's going on. Are we in a housing bubble or are we in a rise in housing? That's a major topic we're going to hit on. We're going to do a deep dive into a Jacksonville local market, and we're also going to talk about our 2025-2026 forecast. So tune into this episode. Can't wait to bring it to you guys. All right, so let's get started here. Before I do, I always love to talk about our methodology because people, the one thing online that we get is this, like, oh, where are you getting your data from? Oh, I mean, a lot of not naysayers, but people have the tendency to question anything that's positive, right? And I have found that to be the source. You know, in the last episode, I talked about, like, yes, I'm in the business, but I don't use this as a lead generation platform. I use this as an educational platform. And that's part of our mantra here. And so I like to dive into our methodology to get started. So first thing we do is we don't come up with like a narrative and go, hey, listen, Charlie, what I want to do is paint a picture of how rosy the market is and sunshines and rainbows. That's not what we're doing. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about some cracks in the market right now on a national level and on a local level here. But what we do is we collect all the data we can get our hands on. And then we give our opinion on that data. And we follow the trends and we research those macro trends in the national and local levels. That's our main source of how we come up with this. And then finally, we like to create some visuals that you guys can look at and, you know, because visuals are easier to understand and give you some content around those visuals and then provide projections. And we use a lot of sources. To name a few: NAR, MLS, MBS Highway, Zonda, FRED, which is the Educational Center for the Federal Reserve, the BLS, CoreLogic, and the U.S. Census Bureau. Like, that is a lot of places we go to get that and compile these data sources and come up, you know, with the plan that we show you guys here today. So I'd like to give credit where credit is due on those sources. We appreciate all the stuff they provide to us in doing this. So for me, I'm going to talk heavily about the supply and demand of the market. That's kind of where I want to get started here. So let's take a recap of 2024. The first thing that jumps off the page to me is this: total agent production in 2024 nationally. 47%. If you need to be sitting down for this one, 47% of agents, of real estate agents in America, did 0 transactions in 2024. Like, that was the thing that jumped. I lead with that because that's the most staggering stat to start the recap of 2024. Nearly half of all real estate agents in the market did not do 1 transaction. Now, why do I bring that up? It's a crowded space. That's nearly 700,000 agents. So you could just take the stats and say in your local market times 47%. That's how many did 0. Might be more, might be less, but if you're using the average, that's what it is. But that's a staggering number. That tells you how crowded this space is right now. That means that there are deals that are going to agents that may only do 1 deal a year. And that's a deal that's taken away from a pipeline of someone that's a career agent. Because the thing about being a real estate agent is that it doesn't have to be your full-time job, right? You've got these, what I call, secret agents in the business, right? They work another job, but then they have this license and they perpetrate to be a real estate agent when it's convenient. It's not their career. And those are the individuals that need to get out of the business because they're crowding the space. And I can say this because the good agents are the ones that tell me there's too many bad agents in the business. That's coming from people that do this as a career and close tremendous amount of transactions. And so if you're a career agent, you're going to give me a thumbs up on that comment. You're going to go, yes, this is what I do. I understand what he's saying. Thank you for saying that. And if you're the secret agent that I'm talking about, you don't like what I'm saying, and that's okay. I'm going to say this. You need to get out of the business. You're crowding the space and you're making it unhealthy, so get out. All right, so next thing I want to talk about is the first-time homebuyer age and what happened in 2024. This is interesting because we put a lot of emphasis on first-time homebuyers in America for a good reason, right? Because for a long time, it was a majority of purchase transactions. Well, there's a couple things that happened in 23 and 24. Besides rates going up, there's a lot of other things that went up. First thing I want to talk about is in 2022, the first time home buyers' average age was 32 years old. It went up in 2023 to 35 years old. And you could argue it went up because of rates, affordability kind of become constrained, and that makes sense. But purchase prices went up too. See, we talk about this in the show all the time, is that real estate price continued to rise. And many of you comment on our YouTube channel at what's your one more with the number one. And by the way, all these graphs, all these charts, all these stats, they're going to be visuals on the YouTube channel at what's your one more. So if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, jump on over to YouTube, check it out. And if you're on Spotify, the video should be on there as well. That's a cool feature they've put in there. But the visuals will be on YouTube at what's your one more. Subscribe and you'll get those. So last year went up to 35 years old. And, and like I said, there's some reasons for that. But what's interesting is that we know rates didn't really come down in 2024. Matter of fact, they kind of like vacillated between, 23 levels, 24 back and forth. So there wasn't a lot of stability there, but home prices continued to go up. Well, so did the average age of the first-time home buyer. It went to 38 years old. That's an all-time high. Think about that for a minute. So if you're 38 years old, how far back do we have to go to get to that age of a home buyer? I believe that's 19. If I'm doing quick math here, this isn't on the slide, but 38 years from today, that's 1986. Is that right? 1986. So, that's before the 90s boom of the millennial generation that we keep talking about is going to take a lot of space in this market as rates start to come down. So 38 years old is an all-time high. That's very close to 40 years old for a first-time home buyer. That speaks to where the market has gone to. Many of you online have made comments such as this, and also speaks to that episode we talked about where people are living with their parents longer in order to buy a home. There's a lot of reasons that are adding to this. Rates, home prices. I mean, it continues to go cost of living. I mean, the things are going up there. Now, I could see this trend coming down significantly as rates come down. And I believe rates are going to come down quicker than home prices. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Some other things I'd like to point out. It's not just first-time home buyers' age that went up. The median home buyer's age went up. So the median, the difference between the median and the average is if you were to throw a dart in the middle of the actual age group and hit the dead center of the home buyers, that age went from last year, 49 years old, to a new all-time high of 56 years old. I mean, that's Del Webb ages right there, right? That's a 55 up in community right there. 56-year-old is now the all-time high for the median home buyer age. Very interesting. Again, same trend as the first-time home buyers, going up due to affordability, cost of living, price points, mortgage rates. All of that's contributing to those things in 2024. And as I talked about the first-time home buyers, look at this slide here. You go back to 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. In 2021, 43% of all transactions that took place were first-time home buyers. 43. Rates were lower. Price points were going up. They were at new highs, but they had not got to the highs they're at now. In 22, rates started to creep up. We dropped from 43% to 26%. In 23, we settled into those rates. We talked about the settling period where people finally had enough and said, enough, I'm going to own a home. I realize it's going to be somewhere between 6.5 and 7.25. That's fine. They settled in. Home prices went up. 2024, home prices went up. Rates went up again. 24% first-time home buyers. Essentially, you've priced them out of the market, you being the economy, the Federal Reserve, mortgage rates, whatever it may be. We have priced, as an industry, has priced them out of the market at this point. 24%, it's the lowest in 20 years. And if you're a real estate agent and your bulk of your business has been focused on first-time home buyers, this may explain why your transaction counts are down. If you're a loan officer and the bulk of your business has been first-time home buyers, this could explain why your transaction counts are down. I was talking with a loan officer the other day and said, this explains it. In 2021, nearly if I did 10 loans, 4 of them were first-time home buyers. Easily right now, I'm 1 in 4. That is an exact statistic matches up with that person's pipeline. And again, it goes to those things and those thoughts I just talked about of affordability, price point, and interest rate. But let's take a look at homeownership in the United States. Now, I have this little funnel on here, if you may, but what I want to show is the total households in the United States is about 136 million total in the United States. And if you take that 136 million of how many are actually owned by a homeowner, that's 91 million, roughly 67% homeownership in the United States. 56.5 of that currently have a mortgage. And we're getting the lock-in effect and what's going on there, but roughly 62% of all the 91 million have a mortgage on them. What's staggering and at an all-time high, also very interesting, is that the other 38%, those are free and clear. Nearly 35 million homes are free and clear in the United States. And of the remaining homes that are not owned, those 45 million are rented. And so when you look at home ownership in America, it's also at an all-time high in a lot of different areas as well, one of those being free and clear, which adds to the equity position we've been talking about here. So the next thing I want to bring up is if I kind of back into those numbers in that equity position, let's take a look at the housing market. I love this chart, by the way, because it speaks pretty clearly to what we've been talking about as far as equity, why you don't have a housing conundrum, a bubble, or all the doom and gloom stuff that's out there. This one kind of sums it up, and we're going to talk about that further in the presentation. But this one really hits it home here. And so first thing we take a look at is the types of homes, those rented versus non-rented homes, rented versus owned homes, and the total households. I break it down a little differently. But on the right-hand side of this, you'll see where it says households, total equity, and average equity per household. Well, if you look at how many homes are rented, there's 45 million. So if you're renting, you have no equity in that property. So that's a zero. We all understand that. But of the 91 million that are owned, there's a 37 trillion equity position in the 91 million. 37 trillion. That's the most recent CoreLogic data set that shows there's 37 trillion in equity in America. If you take that by the amount of households, that's $407,000 worth of equity position on the average household. That's a tremendous amount. Now, obviously, some of that's free and clear, so let's break that down a little differently versus the ones that have a mortgage on them and the ones that don't. So the ones that are free and clear are 35 million properties. That's $20 trillion worth of equity. So an average of about $571,000 of free and clear property per those free and clear homes. But if you look at the mortgage property, that's 56 million mortgages. That's $17.3 trillion worth of total equity in those homes, to the tune of $311,000 worth of equity per homeowner in that particular mortgage situation. Now, the way I look at that is a huge, all-time high, by the way, huge number. And so what of that is tappable equity? So I always like to take 80% of that number. So if you take 80% of that number, that's roughly $240,000 of tappable equity. Now, you say, Quinton, what the heck do you mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is if that person needed to refinance that loan, and let's assume they have a loan that's 5% or less, they're going to be trading for a 6.5 or higher in this given market right now. So there has to be some sort of incentive. Well, what would they do with that cash? Well, I mean, they could do a lot of things, right? They could save it. Usually that's why people don't do it. They don't take it. They don't swap a lower rate for a higher rate just to save cash. They usually do it because they need something. They need to pay off debt. They need to acquire an item, or they need to pay off some credit cards as part of debt, or they need to secure something that they need the cash for, right? Usually, or a divorce situation, that could be part of it as well. But there's opportunities in there. When we talk about credit card debt in a lot of our episodes, this is how I think a lot of it's going to be alleviated in the refinance era that I think is still going to happen. I'll talk about that as well. Other thing I wanted to look at on here was the negative equity position. This goes to the naysayers, because if you look online, there's still a lot of hype. The same people that have been talking about this for darn near 12 to 15 years about a negative equity bubble, boom, bust, whatever you may. There's a million homes that have negative equity position. Now, that's a lot, right? I'm not going to discount that, but those are people that bought 2023 and before and beyond, right? They're in very isolated markets that have flattened out. And so their equity position has gone down because when they bought at high level LTVs. But the total equity position that's literally is, when you look at it, is, look at this on the screen here. It's $0.3 trillion of negative equity position spread out over a million homes. And right now, the default rate in America is at one of the lowest it's been. So negative equity, if you go back to 2008 and you look at that negative equity position, it was substantially higher than that, not even close. And so this is very normal for the market, and actually you could argue below normal in the market there. So that negative equity thing doesn't scare me at all. It actually excites me because that's a very low position on here compared to what we normally see. So next thing I want to jump into here are mortgage rates. And the reason I want to spend some time on this is because this chart goes all the way from 1971 to the most current month of 2024 where we are. Now, the thing I look at on this is you hear people all the time talk about, well, the average rate for the last years since 1971 has been 7.71, and we're below that. So I understand why people aren't buying houses and why people are upset about the rates. I understand that. And if you're an audience member and you were born 1990 and beyond, you don't even believe the 1970s took place where rates were at 16, 18%. So it's hard to kind of like identify with that time frame. So what I like to do is I like to look at the trend line from 2008 moving forward. And the reason I measure 2008 moving forward is because that's when the market came basically into the crash, off the crash, and then we moved forward for essentially the next 16 years of the market. And anyone that was born in 1990, all the way forward to this year, you're kind of in that first time home buyer range of that 32 to 38 years old. And this is all you've known interest rate wise. So that 1970s, 1980s interest rates, they're not even fathomable. So if you look at from 2008 moving forward, the green trend line that I have on the screen represents an average rate of 5.15 during that time frame. And I think that's our challenge. That's our challenge, is that home buyers, potential home buyers, even current homeowners like myself, this is the rate level in which we've known for the extensive 15-year period that we've lived in. And so when you're buying a house, when you're refinancing a house, you're looking for that 5 handle. And the psychology of that is what's driving the market there. And that's why I continue to say, on a previous episode, if we got to 6% and we could hold the line at 6% in a given market, boy, we would move a lot of properties, because almost every loan has some sort of discount on it. And so that discount would put you in the 5s. And the psychology of the buyer is at the 5s. That's what they've known. That's where they're comfortable. That's where they live. And this essentially jumps off the page to prove that point. And so also many of you online said, listen, we get to 5.875, we'll jump. Even the most recent Fannie Mae economic survey for home buyers says the 5s is where it's at, that it would literally be the majority of future homeowners are ready to make a move at that point. And it's because that's what we've known. That's what we're comfortable with for the last 14 years. And it's clear as day on this chart. So when I take a look at gains in the market nationally, if you look at from last year to this year, we were up. And so I think that that's interesting too, because 2%, yes, 2% is not a lot, but 2% is a number that I think that, is not negative 2%. It's a positive 2%. And if you were to listen to some of the pundits and you watch some of the crap online, you would think we're going backwards 10, 12, 15%, but we were up too. Again, the price of the product, in this case, real estate, is going up again. Rates are elevated and the price has gone up. Now, those two things don't go along, because when you look at supply and demand, that's what's driving this here, because quite honestly, when the price of the real estate is going up, you should be seeing some sort of incentive for buyers to demand that price, right? And that incentive could be a reduction in rate. It could be incentivized terms, but that's not out there. Now, there's incentivized terms in the builder market, but that's not out there in the form of the resales, and yet the resales are continuing to go up. And I think that's something that's missed in this overall equation, is that these price points continue to rise because inventory is still suppressed and the demand of home ownership is there, even though the age of that homeowner is being pushed back compared to where it was during this time last year. So that's something that I want to take a look at as we dive into our forecast and our look ahead here. So the next thing I want to take a look at is this thing I like to call the condo conundrum. Now, if you live in Florida, Texas, let's say Alabama, anything that has a coastal line to it here inside the Gulf or the Atlantic, North Carolina, you're included in that, South Carolina, there is this condo conundrum that's taking place. And the condo conundrum, I think, is altering the inventory perception in the market. And the reason I say that, and I'm going to use Florida as an example here because it's easy to get this data. What's happening in Florida is that we have a couple of rules that have taken place here since the collapse of that condo in Miami. So if you were just take a look at our condo inventory in the state of Florida, this is where I think the crack in the inventory market is, because the condo conundrum, you'll see more condos are coming to the market and not moving. And there's a specific reason why. So in this particular chart I'm looking at here, you're going to see multiple lines, and each line represents, based on the legend, the year of inventory based on the month for condo inventory, all the way back to 2018. And what we'll see is at some point in 2022, the Florida Condo Safety Act took place. Now, we did an episode with an attorney, Justin Serrato, talking about this during that time and what took place, but there were specific things instituted by the governor involving condos that were 3-story and higher, proximity to water, and things that had to be done to ensure the safety of those condos. A lot of it began with specific certifications and then what had to be done from an engineering perspective, and then the cost associated with that pushed down to the homeowners association to encumber those costs to get them in line with the requirements of the state of Florida. Well, that took place in May of 2022. And I've got that little circle on there in the Florida Condo Safety Act identifying that. That is the point when we started to see a significant rise in condos, because the associations around the state said, well, we know this is going to cost X. We might as well go ahead and start incurring for that now and trying to collect some of these dues. Well, that raised the price of homeowners association cost and raised the cost of the mortgage payments and the monthly payment from that homeowner. And some of these condos are fixed income individuals. That presents a problem. Some of those were first-time homeowners that were living on a budget. That presents a problem. So you started seeing condos come to the market. And at that time, they didn't flood the market, but they definitely created a rise in inventory, and the market absorbed them accordingly. Because also what was happening at that time is that we still had favorable financing conditions for those properties. Yes, the rates were elevated, but the ability to get those financed through the agencies, being Fannie and Freddie, was still there. If you fast forward to 2024, particularly March of 2024, when the agencies of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac said, hey, time out, we have identified some situations in this condo that go in line with the Florida Safety Act, as well as some other homeowners association things we want to take a look at. Fannie Mae instituted new guidelines and new restrictions on how they evaluate condos. Well, from that point, which I also have a dot circled on here, look at how the condos take off. And this is just in the Florida market, specifically Jacksonville in this case. Look at what happened. They became 18% higher than the 2018 levels. 54% higher than 2023, 83% higher than 2022, and 259% higher than 2021. This is a market that I think is going to continue to apply pressure to the inventory, and I think these are markets that could become stale. They could be buyer beware, because you don't want to buy into a condominium that you're not going to be able to sell later on. More importantly, they're just not financeable in many cases, because what the homeowners associations have done to offset some of this rise in cost is they've reduced their master policy that ensures the entire condominium complex to go to a cash value versus a replacement cost. And the difference in that was, if something gets damaged, and let's say the whole building gets wiped off based on a hurricane or a terrible storm, you would have insurance to replace the cost of that at the current market rate. Well, there is some significant cost differential to get that type of policy, and it's usually expensive because you're replacing future costs. And we all know with inflation that's been around, we all know with just cost of labor, things go up. But if you're guaranteeing the replacement cost, you're going to pay more in premium for that. Well, what a lot of the associations have done is they've gone to a cash value, which is actually a reduced price in the insurance premium, a significant one at that, because you're saying, hey, listen, you're going to give us a cash value of what the property is worth today, not what it's cost to rebuild. And those oftentimes are very different in the evaluation process of what it costs to rebuild versus what the cash value of it's worth today, because you have depreciation, you have, many things that go into that cash value that devalue that compared to replacement cost. That is a significant issue, and that is why you're seeing a rise in some of these condos here, specifically in the Florida market. And I think in the Southwest Florida market, it's going to be a great case study to see exactly how that's impacted. By no means are these going to be a situation where I think you see foreclosures, but I think you're going to see some properties that could sit in the condo section. And I think with the rise in cost in insurance, just normal insurance and HOA dues combined together, that's the condo conundrum we could be staring at here in Florida, as well as some other markets that have those coastal condos as well. If some of the stuff we're talking about on the podcast interests you, and you're like, hey, Q, I want to be a homeowner, I want to buy an investment property, I want strategies on how I can take advantage of the market, I have a solution for you. And that solution is Loan People, to where it's all about the people getting the loan and the people doing the loan. You guys know me by now. I've been doing this podcast for years, but I've been in the mortgage business for 23. And it's very rare you can find a company that has a mantra for loan officers, by loan officers. And what does that mean? That means you have a company that's designed to help provide the best atmosphere for loan officers possibly imagined. And not only that, the most efficient operations for those loan officers to be successful, which provides a better customer service. And that's what you get at Loan People. So much so that they put that in the company name. And at the heart of this is the people. It's in-house processing, it's underwriting, it's closing and funding. And why choose them? They got great rates. They close on time, and they have award-winning service. So check them out at loanpeoplejax.com. That's loanpeoplejax.com. All right. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on to more of a local market part of the episode is that our market in the United States is built on fundamentals right now. There's a demand side and there's a supply side. And right now that demand is outweighing the supply. And what's causing that demand right now is there is a wealth effect that's still growing in the United States. You know, if you look at crypto, I'm going to start with that one. The fact that crypto is up 1.9 trillion on the year in market cap space, and 1.2 of that was discovered in the last 30 days, you have some new wealth effect. And there's going to be some people that take their money, their gains off the table of these intangible assets, and they start putting it into a tangible asset. And that tangible asset could very well, and more than likely will be real estate. And those will be individuals that will come to the market and may pay a little bit of a premium to get that home, or pay what someone's asking for that home, thus raising the price point of it as well. Prices are continuing to rise. That adds to the demand. Why does that add to the demand? Because people sitting on the sidelines are going, wait a minute, I thought if I waited, the price would come down. But why is the darn thing continuing to rise? And I've been out of the game since 22, and here we are at the tail end of 24, and the price points have only gone up. That's not what I was hoping to see. That home that I was looking at that's 400 is now 425. How can that happen? Why did that happen? Well, because you waited 2 years and the price went up, and there's not enough inventory in the market to basically satisfy the demand. We continue to talk about that. And the pool of buyers are continuing to grow. You know, you heard me talk about the first-time home buyer has now been kicked out to the age of 38, but that doesn't mean that the people 37, 36, 35, 34, 32, 33, I missed that one, 33, 32, you get the point. It doesn't mean those people don't want a home. So then every year we clip a new age pool of home buyers and a new level of demand adding to the current level of demand that's not being fulfilled. And when you look at the inventory, it's not like people in a higher age group are giving up their homes and moving out of their homes. So there's not real estate turnover there to help satisfy that. And then from a builder's perspective, we're going to talk about what's going on there, but they're behind in build. That's obvious, but they're also behind in development. They're behind in their vacant development lots. There's a lot of things where the backfill inventory, as you call it, is starting to run out. And so that's presenting issues as well. If you take a look at people that are just tired of renting, I think that's something that's an ongoing demand pool where there's like, you know, it's the end of the year. I'm tired of renting. I don't want to sign another 12-month lease. We're going to just settle in and get a home. That demand mindset is still in the market. While it was down in 24, it's still there in the market. And then this thing that we like to call the divorce, death, job transfer, and bursts. Those are always that DDJB. Those are always going to be things that drive demand. Those are the consistent demand in the market, because if you get divorced, you either got to sell the home or refinance the home. If there's a death, you're acquiring a home, probably liquidating it or selling it or moving from one home into that home, thus selling your home. Job transfers can always cause people to have to buy new homes. And then bursts. You just see the household itself is expanding. You can't live in this 3-bedroom house anymore. You got too many people living in there. You got to go to a 4-bedroom house or a 5-bedroom house. All of those things, those 4 items always create demand. It's like what we call the consistent demand. It's the foundation of demand. On the supply side of things, the low inventory, we talked about that, is lower than it's ever been in certain areas. We have slow building taking place, and a lot of that's for a reason. Obviously, we did a whole episode on why builders are kind of slow walking that, but also backfilled inventory is just about caught up, and that's a concerning sign on the builder side. The lock-in effect is continuing to constrict supply. I mean, suffocating the supply, because again, if you have a mortgage that's at 3 and a mortgage that's at 4, the last thing you want to do is turn around, sell a property to go acquire 6.5%, 7% at a property that is priced at much, higher than your current home right now. So if the rates don't come down to offset that, you're going to continue to see that lock-in effect become an issue and suppress inventory more than it should be. Because I can guarantee, if you're a real estate agent and you're listening to this, you have sellers that want to sell, but they're not going to sell to go move somewhere at a price point that's much higher and much higher rate associated with that. That's that where to go. Like, I would sell, but where am I going to go type mentality. And then, of course, higher rates, all causing that. And that kind of goes to the lock-in effect. Where am I going to go? And higher rates all go together in that one supply category, which is thus being suppressed in our markets all over the country, not just here in Florida, all over the country. And once that unlocks, once that becomes available, it's like going to be a musical chair of transactions as we go through 2025 and into 2026. When I talk about builders, and I kind of want to take a minute to go through this here. If you look at the constraints that builders have, builders typically go through a process that's like raw land, then they get it permitted, then they have vacant developed lots, then they have starts, which is kind of part of going vertical, QMIs, which are quick move-ins, and then they have some inventory or pre-made homes homes that you've come in and said, hey, I want this design, I want this home, I want this package of cabinetry, et cetera, tile, whatever, and then it becomes inventory, and then they sell it, right? Well, when you take a look at builders in general right now, the supply side of things that are readily available are down around the market. Those QMIs are down, right? Those quick move-in readies. But more importantly, builders typically have a pool of lots that are being developed on the backside. They have backfield inventories, they call it, right? They always have a pipeline. Permitting is at an all-time low right now in single-family homes. And the backfield inventory is just about caught up. And we're at a build rate of 1991's population base. When you add all those things together, that is not a good sign of more inventory coming to the market. That's actually, in my opinion, a warning flag that not enough inventory is coming to the market, because we always look to new construction to backfill the inventory and add new inventory to the market. And based on those things that we're observing, you're seeing a lack of that coming to the market. So it bodes the question, like, when is the supply going to get better? You know, if you have, I think we have a stat right now where 1.5 million homeowners, new homeowners, are coming to the market, but we're only building 1.2 million homes. You can see we're never catching up to just the current rate of demand, not even including the back rate of demand. And so I think this is going to add more pressure to the market. And I think the win on this is, right now, the win has been builders, right? If you're a real estate agent or you're a loan officer, I think it'd be hard to argue with that builders have been winning in this higher rate environment from the standpoint of transactions. I don't think they're making as much profit as they once made, but I think they're definitely winning the transaction market, meaning that they're selling more homes than resales. And the reason I think that they're doing that is because the amount of incentive they're putting on this right now. And let me back up. I shouldn't say they're doing more transactions. They're getting a higher price point than resales. That's where they're winning. It's not the transaction count. It's the price point, because builders are controlling the price point by suppressing the interest rate, by adding so many incentives to buy that down, plus giving more attractive incentives to an agent. Maybe they're paying 3, 4, 5% commission to the agent to bring buyers in there. Maybe they're giving the buyers suppressed rates somewhere at 3.99 on a buy down. I've seen that. Or maybe they're giving them a buy down plus $80,000 in upgrades. The list goes on and on and on. I've seen it all, but that's to get these transactions completed, but also maintain the price point. The one thing I haven't seen is builders slash price points in 2024. And I'm not so sure they're going to do it in 2025 either, because, again, we did an episode of this. The last thing the builder wants to do is have to answer to the person that's under contract and getting ready to be in completion, that's been under contract for 6 months, why that same model home on an identical lot is $50,000 more than someone that just signed an agreement to buy a home. So I think that that's a challenge they don't want to go to. Plus, builders know the market's going to change. They know that. So the last thing they want to do is start cutting their prices and having to go through that cycle and creating new comps of lower values when the market turns. That's not where they want to be. So that's why you see these incentives. That's why I'm saying the builder's winning on the price point side of things versus the resale side that's not winning as much on the price point side. Other thing I want to talk about here as I kind of wrap it up is this baby chaser index. I think this is funny. You know, when Alex and I used to do these presentations together, Alex Stewart from the Market Distiller, we always said, one day we're going to work in this baby chaser index, but definitely working it in here because I think it's important. So baby chaser index, and I laugh because it's like, I know you guys hear this and you're like, Q, really? Like, you're reaching on this one. This is a real thing dating back to 2019. And what was tracked by Zonda on this was that when millennials would literally have children, and the grandparents would flock to the city of their grandchildren to be around their family. That's the baby chaser index. That's how they came up with that. And in 2019, they listed all the top 10 cities where you saw more baby boomers moving into to be with their millennial children and then their grandchildren. Well, what we're seeing now is a little bit of reversal of that. Not so much the baby chaser index as much as we are the grandparent chaser index. And yeah, you heard me right on that, because here's what's happening. It's becoming a grandparent phenomenon because now the millennials with the children are flocking to where their grandparents are because they need help with child support and child care to offset some of the rising costs that have taken place. And if you look at these cities on here, obviously for me, I live in Jacksonville, so I highlighted that, and it's been on the map for the last 5 years. But Austin's been reign supreme on this for the last 4 or 5 years at number one. You've got, in the most recent one here at the end of 2023, you got Austin, Charleston, Jacksonville, Dallas, Raleigh, Boise City, Orlando, Charlotte, Oklahoma City, and Houston. And all this information comes from the 2023 U.S. Census revisions here. But to me, it's interesting because those are cities where you're also seeing growth, right? Except you could say in Austin, what's going on there is that they've actually reversed a little bit, right? They've taken a little bit of a decline. If you were to point to one city in the United States that like, hey, listen, they got hit really hard because they went up so quick, so fast, you could argue it's Austin, right? But I would also argue with the migration coming back into the state of Texas, the net migration, as well as this type of index reflecting that, I would willing to say that 2025, 2026, Austin would rebound and become much better position than what they're in right now. And by the way, if you were to buy a home in Austin in 2024, you're probably going to see growth going into 2026 based on the purchase price of what you got in 2024. Just on statistics alone, that should be in your favor. Last thing I want to leave us on here, and we're talking about demographics. They kind of show the way and pave the way for what things are going to look like in the future. And one of those right here is going to be the current age of homeowner, or excuse me, of demographics of the baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zs, and then the population rate, and then the home ownership rate that goes along with that. And we do home ownership by age group, right? So we did it by 30-year-old and then by 40-year-old because that new first-time home buyers moved to 38, so we kind of included the 40-year-olds on there. But if you look at the boomer generation, that's age group 60 to 78 years old with 71 million in population rate. That's a 74% homeownership rate for that age group, right? And by the time they were 30 years old, they had a 48% homeownership rate. And by the time they were 40 years old, they had a 65% homeownership rate. If you go down to Gen X, those are age groups between 44 and 59. That's about 65 million population rate in the United States. They had a homeownership rate of 65% of that. And by the time that group was 30 years old, it was 42% homeownership rate. And by the time that group was 40 years old, it was 59% homeownership rate. Go down to the millennials. Now, these are the people, millennials, this is the generation between millennials and Gen Zs that I believe are driving the market moving forward here from the standpoint of demand. There's more demand coming to the market from this group. So the millennials are 28 to 43 years old. That's 73 million people in population. That's the bulk. It's the highest of the population groups. Currently, that age group has a 45% 45% homeownership rate, leaving 55% to still be accounted for. By the time that group is 30 years old, the bulk of that reaches 30 years old, 33% of that age group will be homeowners. By the time that group is 40 years old, the bulk of that group is 40 years old, they reach 40 years old, 55% will be homeowners. So if I take a look at that, right, over the next 10 years, that home ownership rate should rise from 33% to 55%. That's 10 million more homeowners to the market over the next 10 years. That's 1 million more people to the market just in one generation group to be homeowners in a year, per year, 10 million. If I add in Gen Z, which is currently 69 million in population, they only have an 8% homeownership rate right now. And if you say, hey, listen, within the next 10 years, by the time they're 30 years old, they should have a 33% home ownership rate. If you forecast a 33, just using the same group as millennials, same mindset, 33% home ownership rate by the time that group's 30 years old, that's 17 million more people to the marketplace over the same 10-year period as that 10 million to the marketplace from millennials. So we're talking about 27 million more new homeowners over the next 10 years. That's 2.7 million people a year over the next 10 years to become homeowners, just adding to the current level of demand that we have. Like if that doesn't jump off the page to you and go, wow, it should ask this question, where are those people going to live? And that's a damn good question because we don't have the inventory to suffice that demand. I share that with you because those demographics tell me that the demand is going to continue and the inventory is going to continue to be suppressed. We don't have enough to fulfill that. And so that's one of the reasons why confidently I say on the show, real estate's not coming down. Like it's not coming down. Furthermore, if you take a look at this graph right here, where we talk about the net worth of renters versus homeowners. For those that are saying, hey, I'm just going to rent, I'm just going to continue to rent, we show since 2019 to 2024 what the net worth of being a homeowner is versus the net worth of a renter. Now, remember, net worth encumbers all of your assets, equity included. You're 42 times greater in net worth as a homeowner in 2024 than you are as a renter because the average renter has $10,000 in net worth compared to the average homeowner that has $415,000. It's a no-brainer to go own a home as long as you can afford it. So the last thing I'll leave with is this. For those that talk about the crash is coming, if you go to this screen here, I'm not going to go through all the years, but I list 2012 all the way to 2024, all of the headlines for why the doom bros, as I call it, or the doom and gloom people, talks about the crash is coming. It's the same people, by the way. I mean, there's huge pundits out there that have been calling for a crash since 2012. I listed every reason they said it was going to happen. And then out beside it, I show how much appreciation happened that year in real estate. And every year it was positive. There was never a negative. I just want to lead with that. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's something that if you want to take a look at, it definitely is eye-opening. I'll kind of poke fun at some of them. In 2012, there was a lot of shadow inventory. That's where banks basically, and people said that banks had all this shadow foreclosure inventory they never released. And when they release it, they're going to flood the market and the market's going to go down. They didn't, and the market went up 6%. You know, if you jump in there, it's 2016 home prices have gotten back to an all-time bubble high, and that we're at this new bubble. It's going to burst again. It didn't happen. Home prices went up 5%. I can go on and on and on. 2023, historically low housing demand. Prices went up 6%. So, I mean, everything you see on here counters what those arguments were. And I just want to share that with you guys. We'll put that graph on our YouTube channel as well as this one. You know, what I really wanted to show is from 1942 all the way to 2024, the price of appreciation for real estate during that time. If you look at 1942 to 2024, real estate went up every year except really one time, and that was from 2007 to 2011. And I highlighted those in red. The rest of the time, it's all positive. And it's hard to argue with that, but it's very easy to get into your mind with some of these people and these pundits online that want to continue to talk about a market crash is coming and why it's inevitable. So as I wrap this up here, a couple of things. We did a last episode on the making of a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. If you tuned into that one, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say the spreads are getting better for 30-year fixed-rate mortgages to come down. And if you haven't, go take a listen to that episode. We got a lot of great feedback on it thus far of what's going on. And the last thing I will say as we wrap up here, take a look at the lock-in effect that I got on the screen here. Right now, if you look at this, the thing that jumps off the page to me is that 34% of all mortgages in the United States have somewhere between a 3 and 4% mortgage. 26% of all mortgages have 3% or lower. Right there is 60% of mortgages are 4% or lower in the United States. That's a challenge. That's suppressing inventory because those individuals are not jumping to the front lines to get rid of those rates because they're comfortable with that payment. They've got a lot of equity. Where are they going to go if they sell? What are they going to move up to? It's going to take one of those divorce, death, jobs, birth rates, something to alter that group if rates don't come down. Now, if rates come down and we get that 5 handle on there that I've been talking about, this thing will unlock itself. But in order for those to get unlocked, it's going to take one of those 4 categories for that to happen because they're going to stay in that situation that they're in. Last thing I'll leave you with is my interest rate forecast going in through 2026. You'll see on here I have the MBA line, which is the Mortgage Bankers Association. I have Fannie Mae's forecast, and then I have our forecast on here at one more. You know, for the most part, the MBA is very stubborn in their forecast, and I think it's because last year they got caught a little bit like a lot of us with a forecast that wasn't even in range. I mean, I think if you didn't update your forecast quarterly, that it really looked bad if you looked back on it for the year, which is one of the things we do. We go through this quarterly and update it on here because you have to. There's a lot of moving targets. Nothing's good for the whole year. And then Fannie Mae got real aggressive, so much to the point they actually re-updated theirs about a month after they released it. And for the most part, between Fannie Mae and MBA, they have the range between the years of 2025 and 26, no lower than 6 and pretty much no higher than 6.5. So they're 6.5 to 6 is where they think that line's going to fall. I got us down to the 5.875 mid-year 2025. I do think we will get to that. I think if you listen to that mortgage spread podcast that we did, there's a reason as to why that can happen because these spreads are getting better. It doesn't take the Federal Reserve lowering rates tremendously for that to happen, even on the heels of the Federal Reserve meeting that just happened yesterday and a little bit of the kick in the teeth that the market got over the 2 rate cuts over 2025 forecast. I still believe that this forecast at 5.875 by second quarter, third quarter 2025 is available and possible. I think I'm one of only 2 people that are forecasting that, so we'll see how it lands. And I think in going into 2026, as this thing stabilizes, you're going to see more of a 5.625 availability in the second, third quarter of 2026. Again, spreads get better. You use the current 10-year, you don't even need a lowering of the Federal Reserve for that to happen. And we know that they're going to at least do it twice. I think they'll do it more than that. I don't know why they said twice. I'll stay by my forecast of multiple rate cuts going into 2025. So, guys, last but not least on here, I think you're going to see higher transaction counts in 2025. And I think you're going to see home prices go up in 2025. And I think you're going to see condos continue to be the crack in the armor in the market. And if you're living in a market where condos are relevant and they're on the coastal lines of the Atlantic and the Gulf, I think you're going to have issues there with condo associations. And I think rates will come down. I think you're going to see rates come down. There may not be a significant drop such as what we were hoping for, but I think you're going to see them come down. And I think that you're going to see a lot of vacillation of interest rates throughout the year. I think they're going to come down. They're not going to stay there. They're going to go back up, and then they're gradually going to come back down, and they're going to go back up. I don't feel we will get a window of opportunity where rates stay consistent for longer than 30 days. If it does, it's the greatest thing on earth that would happen. But based on what we're seeing of the actions of the Federal Reserve and the way that they are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde going back and forth, I just don't see how we're going to get a consistent 4-month run of interest rates in a calm market to where we can see a significant amount of transactions move. I think the timing of the market, you're going to have to time it as a buyer and time it as a real estate agent in this market as of right now with the current Fed and what we have going on. So, guys, if you like what you're hearing, please share this forecast. Please share this episode. If you would, check us out on YouTube at What's Your One More with the number 1. And until the next episode, we'll see you at What's Your One More.
I got one more shot, I'm going to make it. One more chance, I'm going to take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got one life to live, so I put my all into it, yeah.